Let's start off with a bit of a background first. I used to be a big Civ 4 player back in the day. I have played Civ 5 and Civ 6, but they were mostly, in my opinion, average game compared to Civ 4. I played Civ 3 years ago. It was mostly okay. Not as good as Civ 4, but really good. However, when I entered the Wikipedia pages for all the Civ games to learn about them, a couple of titles kept popping up. Call to Power, an Activision ripoff which was created after the whole Micropause Firaxis debacle. That Call to Power was a Activision ripoff which was created after the whole Micropause Firaxis debacle. And then Alpha Centauri was created, aka Civ 2.5 in space, that allegedly took place after the canonical space victory. I started reading and the premise blew my mind. Alpha Centauri is a sci-fi 4X game. Okay, so for anyone who's still in the dark, Mandalore made a video about it recommending to everyone. But the gist of the story is that middle to far future, Earth is inhabitable because of war and climate change, and UN decided to send starships to colonize a planet in the Alpha Centauri system. However, war never changed. What I meant is that even in apocalypse, our ideologies keeps making us different, and human once again quarrel about how to govern this new world, and end arriving is the only possible conclusion. To form three different factions with different ideologies, and whoever's society works better or is the only one standing keeps the planet. So we have a Maoist autocratic dictatorship, and Abrahamic theocracy, and a university the size of a continent, and by far the most memorable of them all is the laissez-faire ultra-capitalistic mega corporation. Like, it is inevitable for conflict, and what could go wrong in that sense? And now, once EA has posted the game on Steam, and I didn't need to get into GOG account so I finally decided to try it. First, I gotta say, everything I told about the universe and the story is wrong. Granted, the game is even better. A 4X title doesn't have many scripted moments and therefore can't tell a good narrative. But the charismatic leaders and interesting setting sells it. From the fact that Alpha Centauri system exists, how every leader is at least bit right in their conviction, and even a quote when you unlock a tech about talking about IA and how this system would hypothetically work by iteration of running the same data process over and over again, written 2 decades before most of the modern studios on the algorithms used machine learning. It's clear whoever wrote this is a sci-fi and a regular sci-fi nerd from head to toe. I really believe Brian Reynolds, the game developer, is a big sci-fi nerd. The aliens aren't trees and giant mammals, but worms and fungi. It feels more like a Martian or Interstellar than Star Wars or aforementioned Avatar. Being set in the future in another world also has gameplay implication. that sets it apart from normal Civ games. For example, cities are bases, food production and trades are nutrients, minerals, and energies, respectively, and workers are terraformers. But I will call them the way you do in normal Civ games. There aren't any barbarians in the beginning of the game. Instead, fungi and native life takes their place, with special mechanics like attacking with psychic abilities which do a lot to add to the immersion. Similarly, the xenofungus will harm our productivity and must be cleaned with workers. Although, if we choose the ecological path, it might be beneficial in the future. Here we first deep dive into the government mechanics, meaning that instead of picking one of the different government types, here we get different policies or social engineering. These are very important to add flavors to each factions and playthroughs, as politics plays a vital role in this game, and also because the effect of these policies are substantial to the gameplay. Instead of having different unit types like archers, pikemen, cruisers, here we unlock components to mark the attack, defense, mobility, and some special skills of our units. Similarly to endless space, so we customize our army. The upside is that there is more flexibility in your forces. The downside is that makes creating an army is more tedious, is that because every unit is less visually indistinguishable. However, I did say that the game is old, and nowhere is this more obvious than is the graphics. Not only the few cutscenes are low resolution, low polygon, and they don't even run on most computers. I tried to look for solution, but it seems like I'll conform to locking them on YouTube. As for the game itself, the leader portraits are fine, but with no moving facial features, you can't tell their attitude like in later Civs. Something similar can be said for the rest of the game, where only small pixels separate different types of tiles according to biome, and almost every armor is the same with different color. Functional, but can't compete with different unit models. This principle also applies to the UI and the control themselves. Here you don't left click to select or right click to move, but rather drag to move. If a unit is on a city, by clicking if you select the whole city rather than the unit itself. You have to go into the unit list to select whatever you want to move. And the worst part is there is no action selection in the UI. You know where you choose to move, defend or build X. Instead, you have to select a unit and then right click on it to have access to the cursor menu, and then choose either action or terraform and then whatever you want. Granted, these things are something you eventually grow accustomed to, but it is undeniable that there is way more hassle than the controls of the newer games, and an objectively worst way to control the game. This reminds me of the old RTS titles where there was no right click to move or no making a square to select multiple units, and everything was more clunky as a result. Finally, there are also implications on the rules themselves, the gameplay, and I could once again just choose to say that it's showing its age, but instead I'll explain a series of examples that really aggravated me. The map only seems to have two stages, unexplored and visible, meaning you can't perceive the fog of war, and the map that you have knowledge of but aren't currently watching. At first, I thought there was no fog of war like in Dune 2, but there is. You just don't know where your sight ends. The unit support. This is the maintenance. Doesn't come out from your treasury, but from your city production. One per unit. Not only this means that units are way more expensive and each logistic support is linked to each city. So we want to level out our unit production and make each city a part of your army, which in turn makes the strategy of making a single military making city with barracks not viable. Unless we use spies, there is no way to know the disposition of each faction with each other. At least I haven't found. Tell me what you think of X option in the diplomacy menu. This is the another thing that is gets mixed up with UI version, but there is no tech tree. For once, the research is supposed to be blind. Although you can disable that, what I mean is that there's only way to see all the technologies is to jump from in the next in the civilopedia to get the idea of what you want. I looked it up and large posters with all the text was sold alongside the manuals. So I guess it is not included in the game for technical constraints or something. But having a tech tree in Civ 3 onwards was delightful. While there are borders, here they are a bit arbitrary, as the concept of culture to determine those borders weren't born until Civ 3. Similarly, there is no strategic or luxurious resources. They only offer bonuses. Speaking of, there is only three resources tied to three main work. That is food or slash nutrients, production slash minerals, energy slash trade slash gold. Not bad, but certainly shallow and unoriginal. I'm speaking from memory here, but in Civ 4 onwards, voting in UN works depending on your population. In Alpha Centauri, apart from the head of the planetary council, most elections are chosen by I vote per most elections are chosen by one vote per faction system. I don't know if this was a thing in earlier Civ games, but in the most modern 4X title, making a settler or just spreading your faction cost not only production but also food. This doesn't happen in Alpha Centauri, as building a colony pod only doesn't diminish your population. Similarly, corruption is only affected by the distance between each city and the capital, not the number of cities. The ending result in early expansion in a very quick, as you can augment your workplace by making more cities. In the late game, you are encouraged to have your city every 3 to 4 tiles, no matter the terrain. Messing around, one last thing I discovered before posting this is that The same summary screen that tell you about your unit, cities, and so on, about your rivals, which is conveniently a lot useful, that should be kept secret. So in some ways the UI gives too much information in some areas but not enough information, and the uh, quality of life improvement is terrible even for a 90s game. In short, Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri is a very interesting sci-fi with an intriguing world and a great narrative potential. But after a couple of playthrough, I'm going to return to more modern Civ games. Civilization games has come a long way since then, and Alpha Centauri right now is pretty dated in my opinion. There is no real sprawl drawback, so filling the map with cities packed with every two tiles and largely ignoring the vertical development is the best practice. Units stack, but you can't group them, so it's a pain in the ass to move the armies around. So it's the worst of the both worlds. Turning population into entertainers to maintain happiness is always a tedious way to balance the city growth. Builders with charges is a much better than X turns to build method. The game is in many ways way ahead of its time. However, those things are now of the time, not ahead of it. And the rest of the portion of the game is very much behind the times, in my opinion. Overall, I believe Civ 3 and Civ 4 vastly superior game in my opinion. They may not have the narrative pull of Alpha Centauri, but in terms of game mechanics, they vastly improve upon the foundation laid by Alpha Centauri in almost every aspect. And that's it for my overall review of Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri. That's it for today's video. Thanks for watching.